Hi, dear ones. I'm Amy Rose White, integrative and intuitive psychotherapist, making videos on soulful tools for self healing. Today, I'm going to talk about the tough subject of how to survive suicide loss. Unfortunately, suicide deaths have increased in the last 4 years for probably obvious reasons, and the issue is already epidemic in many populations. Some more high risk than others, but increasingly, suicide is something that really affects all of us, sadly. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about it is because I personally have experienced being a suicide loss survivor in the last year. A couple of people in my life, one of whom was very, very dear to me, and in fact was my longtime mentor and therapist. We don't really talk much about therapists and physicians who take their own lives, but it is sadly a reality and it happens. And one of the more complex things about this kind of loss and being a survivor is the stigma and shame and the way we avoid discussing it that still pervades our culture. So, one of the things that I want to say first about this is that grief related to suicide loss is always what we call complex. Not like there's a simple grieving process out there, unfortunately, but suicide, when people end their own lives, it creates a more complicated kind of grief, especially for the people who were closest to them, but can really affect those of us who didn't even know someone. We see that when a suicide
I meant when a
dies by
celebrity dies.
suicide, that people who had an image of that person or a movie they made or a song that they sang or a band they were in meant something, really profound in their own life and maybe helped them through a time. We can be profoundly affected and impacted by the death of that person, especially if it was at their own hands. So know that it is just going to be more complicated if someone that you know and cared about, or even just someone that you feel affected by when they dies by suicide. This kind of disenfranchised loss is what's meant by that is it's harder because it is on the outskirts of what we deem acceptable and normal and okay in society. I have my own thoughts about that because I believe that the more we honor suicide as a choice, the less negative the stigma will be, and the more compassion and understanding we can have for people who make that choice, even amidst the grief, the anger, the pain, and even the resentment that can come. That is totally a normal part of grieving for those of us who are left to kind of pick up the pieces in the aftermath of a suicide loss. There's additionally so much guilt and shame for any of us that survive suicide, meaning that we've lost someone to it. Those of us who've actually survived a suicide attempt is a whole nother topic, and I will address that in another video. However, the sense that we could have or should have done something to intervene or to prevent this person's death is probably what haunts people the most, particularly in cases where there were no warning signs that anyone close to the person observed. And unfortunately, that can and does often happen, particularly in men. However, it can be the case for anyone. The survivor's guilt of feeling like there must have been something that we missed, or we could have asked more questions, or maybe we talked too much about ourselves, or we didn't check in on that person in the final days, weeks, or months of their life. All of those can be such a heavy burden. And I believe that one of the reasons why those thoughts are actually really natural and actually adaptive and serve as a coping strategy in some way, even though most people will say, like, how can that be? And no, don't tell yourself that. It wasn't your fault, which is all, practically usually true. The sense that we could take responsibility or ownership or blame ourselves actually tricks our brain into thinking we have more control over the situation than often we do. And then while there are definite steps that we can take to reduce suicide, I'm an active participant in some public health communities and subcommittees in where the state where I live around reducing suicide, particularly for women who've had a baby recently. Often, ultimately, we don't have the power to make that choice for someone. We can heed the warning signs, we can listen to someone, we can take them seriously, we can reach out for help and try to get others involved, but it is an individual choice at the end often, typically that is made in the throes of a mental health crisis or a long-term decision, or a decision that's made after a long-term or chronic illness. There are just so many reasons why people make this decision. Yet blaming ourselves and having a sense of personal responsibility is one way that I think we kind of feel like we don't have to deal with the immense amount of uncertainty and lack and loss of control we have in these circumstances. So while it doesn't really serve us to blame and shame ourselves or feel immense amounts of regret or tell ourselves this was our fault, it's also one of those things you have to say, when I go to that pattern of thinking, I'm probably doing this to try to feel like I could have changed the outcome. And what might be more needed right now is for me to bring my love to myself, my compassion to myself, like I would someone that I care about, and say, we're just going to have to sit with the fact that we don't know. We might never know what could have been different or why this happened, and accept that it just did, and feel fully the pain of that without going to the mental and story and negative narrative of it was my fault. That usually doesn't get us anywhere but a complicated grief that will look like long-term depression over time. It's very normal in the early days, weeks, and months, but if you find yourself staying there, you definitely want to seek professional support for how to emerge out of that into a way of thinking that's going to serve you more and allow you to be with the feeling rather than that negative mental loop. In terms of healing from suicide loss, what I would say first is keep the Suicide Lifeline numbers in your emergency contacts in your phone, post it all over your house, and make sure everyone in your immediate vicinity knows that 988, our national, in the United States, our national suicide lifeline is the place to call or text or go to the website. You can Google 988 to get help. If you ever find yourself in despair or deep depression, you don't even have to be actively considering suicide. But the reality is, those of us that are left in the wake of a suicide loss are at higher risk of ending our own lives as well, particularly like with each additional person in our lives over a lifetime that we know who has ended their life. The odds of us actually completing successfully a suicide increase dramatically, unfortunately. So we want to be in the habit of reaching out in the early stages of feeling a sense of meaningless to life, pointlessness. Why am I here? This was my fault. I should join them. I don't matter. People would be better off without me. Those are all really big red flags for pick up the phone, text 988 like right now. Do not wait till you're any further down the line considering how you might end your life and finding access to means to do that. You want to be talking to someone, a therapist, a friend. Do not be too proud to tell someone that even a year or 2 years later, you're deeply affected by this and need to talk. And sometimes you might even have your own thoughts of ending your life. It's really, really normal. I actually think that thinking of suicide can be an adaptive coping strategy because it gives us, again, a sense of options and choices. Now, it's a permanent choice we can't take back that is typically made through the lens of believing there are no other options, which is why we want to reach out to people who are struggling, because we aren't thinking clearly in those moments, and just giving ourselves a little time, even if it's like I could make that choice at another time, buys us enough time to see what changes. And even if nothing in our environment changes, obviously we can't bring those people back, for example. Our ability to connect to joy, our ability to find a sense of happiness, meaning, or fulfillment, even if it's not all day, every day, we begin to have a more realistic appraisal that we do matter, that we are significant, that the people around us actually do care and love us, even if it's just a couple, even if it's mainly our pet. that we have a role to play here, and that negative spiral that we get stuck in following a suicide loss can keep us from seeing. It's almost like we join in with the person who might have made that decision, even though it's very difficult to ever know exactly what people were thinking and how they got there. Even for people who are therapists, it remains a mystery, unfortunately, for many of us. And I think that's one of the most painful things about surviving suicide of a loved one is all of the questions. We're always going to be sitting with more questions than answers. And I think that it's by talking about it, which is the next thing I wanted to talk about in terms of healing, it's by keep bringing them up. It's like, keep talking about it. If you're still befuddled a year later, like, I just don't understand this, keep discussing it. I personally went to the celebration of life for my beloved therapist, not realizing this is how she died. I assumed it was a health-related issue. When I got there and kind of pieced it together during the ceremony and then was told this by her mom afterwards, I was in total denial and shock. I could not believe it. I also couldn't believe that we just went through an hour and a half, eulogy and ceremony and gathering where this was not actually spoken about. And it was obvious that many of us that were either clients or colleagues had no idea. Personally, the irony of a therapist taking their life and then it being stigmatized and not talked about, it still haunts me. And it's one of the reasons that I'm making this video today, because she would have wanted us to talk about it. I don't know exactly what was going on for her. I have an idea, but none of us will know. And we could have helped each other understand the process of how a seemingly very high-functioning, extraordinarily talented, gifted person can get to the place where this makes sense to them as an option. So the more you can talk about it, the more you can find a safe place to keep bringing up that person's name, to remember all the fun things, to allow their life to live through us, and to still allow for the anger and the frustration to be present, and to not hold guilt about that either, because we get to feel all of the fullness of the grief around suicide. That's going to be the healthiest thing, not just like the good parts or the parts that we feel we should feel. It's really important to welcome all of it. And again, this is one circumstance where I absolutely suggest getting professional help. Suicide Loss Survivors Group is a wonderful place to connect with people who will really get this kind of loss in a way other people won't. Individual therapy, of course, journaling, there's workbooks on this. I love the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's not specific to suicide loss, but it's a wonderful kind of, guide through the process of grieving in general. But you really want to find other people who get what it's like to be in the confusion and disillusionment of this kind of ending. So in conclusion, I'm telling you, keep 988 in your phone. Keep that, written on a sticky note on your refrigerator. Do not hold this alone. And know that if a year, 2 years, 3 years, you find yourself kind of in a roller coaster of emotions, that is normal, and reach out for more help. Get into a group. Do not keep holding it by yourself alone. If you find yourself, having regret, having those self-blaming questions and thoughts coming through your mind, reach out for more support. And know that over time it does tend to get better. However, the sadness and the discomfort with the not knowing is one of those things we kind of learn to accept and tolerate, but it is never easy. And my heart goes out to you and is with you in this process. I hope that you know that. Thank you for being here today. Please share your comments and thoughts below. I appreciate you liking this video. If it was meaningful to you, please share it with anyone that you think could benefit. And remember, I don't wear sequins because suicide is awesome. I wear sequins to honor the fact that I'm still here, that I have been lucky enough to make the choice to be on the planet. And I celebrate all the people that haven't made that choice and who have positively affected and supported my life. By celebrating, by wearing these things, it's my way of honoring all of the life that we still get to live here on this planet. And until next time, may you be happy, may you be well, may you be safe, and may you be at peace. I'll see you soon.